Spoiler warning, the following is an in-depth analysis. If you haven't seen this film, you might want to before watching this review. Turtles Forever really caught me by surprise when it aired in 2009. I knew it was the Turtles' 25th anniversary, as some other box sets and such were celebrating it, but I wasn't aware of this until someone uploaded it in parts on YouTube. I have to admit that I was consumed with a wave of nostalgia as I watched it the first time, both for the 80s show and the 2000s show, which I had lost track of for the last several years and hadn't seen in a long time. I was floored that it even got made. The whole time I watched it, I imagine I looked like I probably did when I saw the 80s show for the first time when I was 4 or 5, my mouth hanging open and my eyes wide with excitement and fascination. There was no thinking about it critically, dissecting it with a keen eye for story or plot or characterization, or even looking at it like a Turtles fan combing it for continuity errors. This experience wasn't about all that. Its primary concern isn't telling a story so much as celebrating a legacy, a franchise that has spawned dozens of different versions and has been a major cult phenomenon since its inception. The movie closes with a scene in our world, the Turtles creators Eastman and Laird just finishing the first Ninja Turtles issue in 1984 and wondering if it'll even sell. And that's the perfect sentiment to end what's essentially a 70-minute Ninja Turtles tribute in the clever guise of a movie. How incredible is it that what started as an underground, independent parody of superheroes, keenly aware of how bizarre and tongue-in-cheek it was, would become a major pop culture influence for over 2 decades. Now that I've watched this again with a critical eye, not something I really wanted to do, I might have preferred just remembering it as an unexpected, delightful romp through my childhood, I can say it's not perfect, but I still really enjoy it. It takes the idea of a multiversal crossover, something comics have been doing for years, and takes it to its greatest extreme, finding a way not only to canonicize every Turtles property in one Turtle-centered multiverse, but even recognizing within its story that the whole thing is a fictional creation from another universe, the real one. So I'm going to take a look at Turtles Forever from the perspective of commentary on fictional superhero worlds and how they operate. And I'll talk about how it works with a totally unique set of rules because, unlike most stories, it knows and calls attention to the fact that it's a fiction. I'll also address some of the choices it makes with each of the 3 main Turtle universes, which ones are effective and which ones really aren't, because it's definitely got its issues. After all, this thing is intended primarily as a love letter to the fans, so how well it manages that is really paramount to its success. There would really be no point for anyone who's unfamiliar with Ninja Turtles to see this. It's not about the Ninja Turtles so much as it's about the evolution of the Ninja Turtles as an entertainment franchise. The overall plot is in the tradition of a lot of comic book interdimensional crossovers, where some sort of conceit is needed to get characters of different universes together, so that rather than just pretending like they always lived in the same continuity, the story acknowledges the fact that these characters couldn't have possibly met without some cosmic or supernatural event that puts them together. A pitfall a lot of those stories fall into is that rather than just being a clever excuse to tell a story about those unlikely characters having to deal with each other, the explanation of why it's possible takes over and becomes the whole story. It's similar to some superhero origins, where the how and why becomes more important than the exploration of a protagonist character after the spectacular MacGuffin that gets the ball rolling. Comic book examples of this, I think, are Crisis on Infinite Earths and the DC Marvel Amalgam line. Both are books I enjoyed, but I felt the narratives of each were bogged down with cosmic technobabble. And what surprised me about Turtles Forever is that it kind of does this too, but it was done in such a creative way that I didn't mind it. There's already a great way to do this built into the 80s show, since the Technodrome can open portals to other dimensions, and I'm glad that's how it was done here. The crux of the story is the idea that there's a whole multiverse centered around the Ninja Turtles, and that if the Utrom Shredder finds and destroys the source turtles in the original Turtles dimension, which he appropriately dubs Turtle Prime, he'll destroy every Ninja Turtle in the multiverse, but also all the offshoot dimensions as well. This doesn't end up just being a long-winded explanation of why there are multiple dimensions of Ninja Turtles, but rather builds reality into a fiction. We, the viewers, realize, especially with the Eastman and Laird bit at the end, that the reason there are all these dimensions is because the Turtleverse consists of every version of the Ninja Turtles ever conceived in our world, beginning with that first comic book in 1984, which is why that's the setting for Turtle Prime. When the Utrom Shredder transforms the Technodrome into a weapon to destroy universes and starts using it, settings disappear by being erased, as if an artist was wiping them right off a canvas. I also think it's clever that we can clearly tell that's what's what's going on, that these are all fictional characters in a fictional universe that can all only exist if that first comic book happens, but everyone in the movie is still oblivious to the fact that they're fictional characters, even as they're catching on to the patterns and tropes that exist within their multiverse, precisely because it's all a fiction. Again, this isn't a movie dealing with the progression of a character. It's an exploration of this fictional property, where it started, where it is in 2009, and how it got there, from the perspective of the characters inside that property. Sure, the whole thing is a novelty, but I dig it. The most recent series, of course, is the centerpiece of the film, and on the whole, the movie is from the 2000 show style. So the majority of the action happens in their universe. The soundtrack mostly sounds like the one from their show and has variations on their theme song, though I very much missed the 80s theme and kind of hoped it would have been there. I suspect there were copyright issues. And they're used throughout most of the film as the eyes for the audience. Until the very end, we see them as the more level-headed, down-to-earth turtles compared to the silly and wacky 80s turtles who don't seem to know how to take anything seriously, aren't very competent, obsessed with pizza, and are all constantly laughing at their own jokes. More on that later. So, as they and their Shredders start seeing more of the Turtleverse, each claims there's a multiversal constant, and these ideas are thematically what the movie is getting at. Shredder says that the multiversal constant is that if you put something the Turtles care about in jeopardy, they'll always predictably walk right into your trap. And that's so true. Every version of the Turtles I've seen uses that idea somehow. Usually either Splinter or April gets kidnapped, the Turtles have to rescue one of them, and then they're in a horrible death trap they have to get out of. The Turtles always see it as noble, the villains always see it as stupid and gullible. But the key point is, no matter the trap, the Turtles always get out of it. The Turtles, on the other hand, say the multiversal constant is the Shredder's huge ego. No matter the version, he always defeats himself by going too far. Sometimes, like at the end of this movie, he gets really close to his goals, but because he can't imagine failure, he always fails. But the question is, does he fail because the Turtles outsmart him or outwit him, as if their nobility gives them an edge of intelligence and he always makes a stupid move because he's too full of himself? Oftentimes, no. More often, the Turtles simply win because the universe smiles on them for being those noble creatures. I complained about this when I reviewed the first live-action Turtles film, and admittedly I rated it lower than I should have because I got so fixated on this point. I didn't like that Splinter ultimately saves the Turtles and saves the day when it's supposed to be their movie. I know my opinion on this isn't popular with some Turtles fans, but I still stand by it. Again, even if I do concede that I scored it too low. The Turtles, missing Splinter throughout most of the movie, learn how to work together as a team on their own, and so the conclusion to that arc really should have been their defeating the villain together without the help of their mentor. That's just my opinion. But what I love is that Turtles Forever comments on that and says it's a pattern throughout the whole gambit of Ninja Turtle stories. Sure, they sometimes win through ingenuity and teamwork, but other times it's just luck. But this movie, having a really strange set of rules, gets to come right out and say, yeah, this is a fictional world where the Ninja Turtles are always the center of everything. Their stories will always point out that they're good, caring, noble creatures who usually try to do the right thing so that their fans will cheer them on when they win, but sometimes they just win because of who they are. Thus, at the end, Shredder is defeated by sheer dumb luck. Bebop and Rocksteady had unplugged the cord that powered his universe-destroying beam, and when they plugged it back in, thinking they were doing what Shredder wanted, it disintegrated him, and the Turtles are victorious. Both the Turtles and Shredder are right about their universal constants, and because it's their universe, the Turtles win every time, regardless of what they do or how close the Shredder gets to winning. And luck is on their side the whole movie. Karai saves the modern and the 80s Turtles the last possible second from being completely disintegrated by the Shredder when he's dissecting them to get the information he needs to find Turtle Prime. And when they all nearly don't make it when the world is disappearing around them, a convenient smack on the 80s Donatello's portal stick gets them all out alive. This might have been a huge problem for me in any other movie, but I think that trope is being lovingly poked fun of here. And it's an interesting commentary that holds true for a lot of other superhero properties. The idea that the universe looks kindly on those who are heroic and those whose hearts are in the right place, and frowns on those who don't. In the real world, sometimes the bad guys win. In the Turtles' reality, no matter what reality it is, the good guys always win. Raphael and Leonardo always make up, Splinter and April and whoever else are always rescued. There's always a happy ending to give us role models to look up to and to provide an escapist fiction to escape the sometimes bleak and seemingly hopeless real world we all live in. Is it predictable? Yes. Is it good storytelling? Not always. But this movie is so much fun because it knows just what it is. It can laugh at that, and at the same time remind us that there are kind of noble intentions behind the formula. Now, at the same time, it's not real fair to the 80s series, but I'll get to that in a moment. And now that I'm past my overly rambly what's this movie about section, I get to the most overly nerdy critique I can think of. It's a little convenient that out of the 3 Turtle universes we visit, the only one that seems to unfold linearly is the 2000s Turtles. This movie serves as a finale for that series, so all of its history is behind it. And yet the other 2 seem to be locked in whatever time period the movie wants to use. The 80s series seems to be sometime in the middle of its run, before the somewhat darker period there at the end with the mutations and Lord Drag, and it seems very careful not to be too specific about many characters or events as to avoid placing it in any period during its run. Then the black and white Mirage comic book Turtles are in the issue where they fight the Shredder for the first time on a roof. I don't get why they're traveling through dimensions and time. If the new Turtles dimension is clearly in a particular time period, it doesn't make sense that the others just exist in one time frame all the time. So is it the 80s all the time in one dimension and the 2000s in another, but they're always happening at the same time? And if the 1984 Turtles spawned the whole multiverse, which has been going on a while, why are they trapped in one time all the time? Like I said, extremely nerdy criticism. And based on the idea of this fictional Turtleverse forming because of how Turtles' stories worked in the real world, where one would spawn another and that would spawn another, I think there's a real missed opportunity with the 2000s Turtles and how they look at the 80s Turtles. The closest thing to a character arc the 2000s Turtles get is coming to appreciate the 80s Turtles a little more by the end, after being thoroughly irritated with their immature antics. Even Michelangelo, who at the beginning loves them because they're a little like him. At one point, Raphael says, "Geez, it's like we have 5 Mikeys now." Since Utrom Shredder discovers that Turtle Prime spawned the rest of the multiverse, it seems reasonable to think that maybe a way could have been built into the movie to let the 2000s Turtles know that they were created post the 80s Turtles, and that without them, they wouldn't even exist. That would have called more attention to the idea of the real-life progression of the Turtles franchise intruding in on this fictional world. One of the best moments is when the 2000s Turtles get a taste of their own medicine with the gritty 1984 Turtles, who, because of their relatively chipper attitudes and their multicolored headbands, are as goofy to the original Turtles as the 80s Turtles are to the 2000s Turtles. Wow, did you get all that? This is a really weird movie to review. So, especially after that moment, where perhaps the 2000s Turtles are realizing that if they were created later than the others, they're a perfect mix of the gritty and the campy, maybe there would be more weight to the idea that they appreciate the silly Turtles a bit more, because they need them like the whole multiverse needs the originals. Speaking of silly, these versions of the 80s Turtles seem like a parody of themselves. The original series got more and more cheesy as it went along, before the end, but these 4 are a lot more oblivious and irritating than I remember them. Sure, they do a lot of the same things they did in the cartoon. They shout a lot of catchphrases, Turtle Power, Go Green Machine. They use a lot of puns, and Raphael breaks the 4th wall and talks directly to the camera, which really cracked me up the last time he does it here when Hun says, "Who are you talking to? There's no one there!" I'm even kind of okay with them walking right out in public, which surprises the 2000s Turtles because they're always trying to stay out of sight for fear the humans won't understand or accept them. Early on in the 80s show, they did the same thing, disguising themselves with trench coats and even rubber human masks, but they were less concerned about it as the series went along. Though I must admit, going into a pizza place, freaking everybody out, and being completely clueless as to how their unusual appearance is affecting people is ridiculous. The big difference between these versions and the original, and the biggest letdown of the movie, is that except when the movie needs them to do something individually, like Donatello building his portal stick, they're all interchangeable. Every time they run off and do something goofy, all 4 of them get the same idea at the exact same time, shout something and leave. They constantly stop everything to make a lame joke, and again, it's always all of them together, having the same stupid idea at the same time. When they run off to go to that pizza place, for instance, they act like they're just about to start giving the 2000s Turtles some answers about who they are and where they come from, and then they all decide to be jerks and withhold any information at all until they've eaten some pizza. And it's also idiotic how they seem to just now realize that there are 4 other Turtles and that they're not in their universe. The original Turtles, while in an often campy show, did know how to be serious about things, and they were genuinely worried they might not be able to make it out of situations alive, whereas here, they just seem to expect they'll always win no matter what. They will, of course, but I don't think the old Turtles realized that. They didn't always laugh at each other's lame jokes, either. How many episodes ended with one of the Turtles saying something the other 3 thought was stupid or too punny, and they all revolted against him, yelling things like, "Knock it off!" and "Oh, come on!" Quite a few. I could throw out a lot more examples of why the feel of the 80s Turtles is way off, but suffice it to say, these aren't really the Turtles I grew up with. And for a bunch more examples, watch Fellis' review on That Guy with the Glasses. He makes a lot of good observations about what they got wrong with the old show. It bugs me less than it does him, probably because he doesn't know the 2000 show and I saw enough of it to appreciate this as a send-off for that series. I will agree with him on his point that everything the old Turtles do is treated as moronic, and if something closer to the real 80s Turtles were here, they'd probably make fun of the modern Turtles for some things too. But like I mentioned earlier, at least the 2000s Turtles get their comeuppance a little at the end when the Mirage Turtles treat them like they're idiots. It's hard to believe the animation is so close to the original series. All the character designs are spot on and the Turtles' lair looks exactly right, but that only the most surface references are used. It's cool that we go to the 80s Turtles world, if ever so briefly, though the joke about the anti-Technodrome gear, which includes roller skates, is awful, and it's a huge missed opportunity not to include some villain or supporting character cameos. Again, it's kind of a reunion movie. Fan service is what projects like this are for. How about Baxter Stockman, so the 2000s Turtles can be really surprised at how different he is in this universe? Or Slash, who Hun kind of looks like when he's mutated. Personally, I would have loved to have seen a Metalhead appearance. So either the people who made this movie didn't see much of the show, and a lot of it was available even if they didn't have access to Masters, so there's no excuse for that. Or they purposefully dumbed them down to make the 2000s Turtles seem cooler, as Fellis suggests. I'm really not sure, but that whole incredibly neat idea of a multiverse created by the real-world production of various Turtles universes really starts to break down when one of them is a parody of itself. It's really a shame that none of the original voice actors were hired for this movie, apparently because 4Kids is a non-union outfit and they were union actors. I imagine a lot of them would have liked the opportunity to do this, especially James Avery and Pat Fraley, Shredder and Krang, who I've seen in featurettes, both all too happy to do those voices for fans whenever they get the chance. Chances are the producers didn't have the biggest actor pool to pull from for this because of the union thing, so it's maybe lucky that as many of the new voices worked as well as they did. The worst is the 80s Leonardo, who sounds an octave deeper than the original. The best of the 80s Turtles is probably Raphael. He gets pretty close on a lot of his lines. Bebop and Rocksteady sound great, the 80s April and Splinter sound nearly perfect, and I kind of wish they had more lines because they got so close. 80s Shredder is hit and miss, and Krang is surprisingly decent, but the pitch is usually a little too high. My most fond memories of the 80s show are of Shredder and Krang. I've recently gone back and watched a few episodes from the middle of the series, seasons 4 and 5, and what I find is that the episodes with Shredder and Krang are really fun, and I don't really care for the shows they're not in. So I was pretty disappointed with what was done with them here. They weren't especially competent in the original show a lot of the time, but both were a lot more threatening than they are here, and at least their banter together was fun to watch. Here, they don't say much that's very clever, and Krang seems nearly subservient to Shredder. At one point, he even waits for Shredder's word before he does something. That wasn't their relationship at all. Both wanted to be in charge, but Krang basically was. After all, the Technodrome and everything in it was his technology. I do like the bit where they're both hoping to find a version of themselves in this universe, and Krang gets excited because the Utrom Shredder looks a lot like him. Fellis pointed out in his review that they shouldn't expect to find Krang here because Krang himself is from another dimension. That's a good point, but it's also an oversight that Shredder doesn't find a Krang here because there really is one. There's an Utrom in this universe named Krang. I do think a team-up between the two Shredders and Krang would have been a much better idea than dumbing them down like the 80s Turtles and putting the 2000 Shredder at center stage. It might have been interesting to see both of them trying to rid the multiverse of Ninja Turtles together, and the 80s Shredder realizes before the Utrom Shredder that they're going to kill themselves in the process, and maybe he's the one that saves the Turtles from being disintegrated. Well, now I'm rewriting the movie, which isn't fair, but as clever and well thought out as I think aspects of this movie are, others needed more attention, and I'm sure a fair number of people watched this because of the 80s Turtles not caring much about the recent show and were disappointed by it. By the way, isn't it interesting the very specific audience this is intended for? To fully appreciate this movie, unless you watched a lot of reruns of everything or bought the DVDs, you'd have to have grown up with the 80s show, then watched the 2000 show when it was on out of nostalgia. It's not really a kids' movie. Most fans of both of these shows would have already grown up by the time the movie was made, considering the new show went 7 years. It's kind of a wonder it even got made. I love the look and feel of the Mirage Turtles. It's just what I'd imagine an animated version of those comics to be. I also love that they're narrating like they did in those books. And I even like the gag of their Shredder getting beaten by the other Turtles throwing trash at him, because in the book, and in the movie for that matter, he's standing right on the edge of the roof just for dramatic effect. It would be pretty easy to just knock him off if he he was distracted. There are a lot of fun references and Easter eggs like that. I also like that Tokka and Razor are created in the new wave of mutates created in the 2000s Turtles universe by the mutagen the Turtles brought with them. This one's really tough for me to rate. I think it looks amazing. There was a lot of good fan service for me. I was smiling a lot when I was watching it, and creating a story that ties every version of the Turtles together is really clever. But the 80s Turtles, Shredder and Krang, are really shafted, and their presence was too important to the novelty of the movie not to be more effective. I'm going to give it a 2.5 out of 4.